Could this man be president? Well, we've been joined by Washington Capapiro, chairman of the Association of African-Owned Enterprises. Now, you're a business leader. You come from Zimbabwe, which has been led for over 30 years by a person who was considered to be one of the best of Africa's leaders. He's now considered in some quarters to be one of the worst. What does that say about African leadership and the fact that we've had a footballer who's tried to become president of Liberia, and now we have a singer who wants to be president of Senegal? It's come to something, hasn't it?
It has, it has. I mean, looking at politics in Africa, yeah, it's very important to note that the dynamics don't work quite the same way, yeah, as they do in the UK. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we're looking at Yosundor with his popularity, culminating from years of doing goodwill, yep, a goodwill ambassador for the UN and several other projects that he's done. I think it's a natural progression for him to sort of take that forward and try to implement his influence, you know, to exert his influence in politics.
But he said he's not a politician. You know, he's a campaigner. He wants his music to carry forward political messages. You know, he's built a studio. He's got a newspaper. He's really, really popular. But he's got no education or little education. Left school without it. And some people say, well, he can't be president. He's not qualified. They said the same about George Weah too. Yeah,
I mean, it's the same thing that George Ford said. Yeah, that you know, he can access all the knowledge and all the expertise that he needs to from, you know, at the touch of a button by calling somebody. So I think we can neglect the fact that he doesn't have the necessary education, as it were, the formal education. But I think that, you know, a lot to do with the experiences that he's, you know, the things that he's experienced in the diaspora. Yeah. He can bring a lot of that to Africa, to the Senegal agenda. Is
it a good thing that people from outside the political fray are now looking at politics in Africa? You know, in Nigeria, we know Fela Kuti wanted to become president, you know, back in the 70s and 80s. He wasn't allowed to stand. Because we've got too many of these big men who see the people as small boys and small girls.
Yeah, I mean, they are big men. They are big figures. We can't, you know, I'm very strong about in not neglecting that fact.
But it's the big personality, and you know, here we complain about personality politics and we say it should be about policies, but it's even bigger personality politics in much of Africa. That can't be a good thing, can it?
It can't necessarily be a good thing if you're looking at it from just the personality perspective. But let's look at the work that he has done previously. Yes. If we look at the work that he's done with the UN, if we look at the work that he's, you know, the message that he's always been talking about over the past decade or so, he is a goodwill ambassador, so he's going to bring good practice. If you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was a big personality.
Yes, he was.
And he used that to drive policy and legislate different directions for California. So I think it's an interesting mix. It'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
All right, from leadership in Senegal, on to Nigeria now. And first, the good news. The economy is expected to grow by a whopping 10% this year. Now the bad. More people are being killed in the north as the Islamist group Boko Haram steps up its attacks against Christians. At the same time, the country is bracing itself for Monday's national strike over rising petrol prices after the government removed the oil subsidy.
Jonathan is Nigeria's only terrorist. We cannot agree this kind of financial IMF terror. Nigeria cannot pay the same price of petrol as America. We don't have American minimum wage.
Nigeria today need to come up and fight against this and injustice, not only to the present generation, but the generation that are yet to be born.
Washington, we've got Occupy Nigeria, we've got projected growth of 10%. At the same time, we have Muslims in the north telling Christians to get out. They want an Islamic State hardline Sharia. There's talk of Al-Qaeda influences there, Boko Haram, Western education, books are bad. And we have a president whom some people say is impotent.
Difficult situation that's happening in...
What a cocktail.
Very, very, very mixed cocktail. I mean, if we started the political situation now where they're implementing, you know, the subsidy, removing the subsidy, it's a difficult situation that the government's in because, you know, over the years they've created a cartel of very wealthy business people making money from importing fuel, and this is a country that actually generates fuel. So it's a very difficult situation that the government's in.
But can you understand why they did this? Because it's double the petrol prices literally at the pump overnight. One fell swoop, up by 100%.
Exactly. It's a very difficult situation, but it's a situation where the government's implementing policy without really taking into consideration the people. Yeah. And it's the people that put them into place. So again, a very difficult situation for the government to handle. The situation with the extremists and Boko Haram, it's a horrible situation. And again, it's difficult to see how a country like Nigeria is going to really work through this, because there's such a big divide between the Christian and the Muslims.
Well, I mean, it's evenly divided, 50% Muslim, 50% Christian.
But there's no way that these two are going to actually gel. There's no way that I can see them actually deciding, okay, now we're going to work together. So again, we're interested to see what solution that Jonathan and the government in Nigeria are going to come up with.
And at the same time, when you're a businessman and you've got interests all over Africa, you've got representatives all over Africa, 10% growth this year, it's a fantastic economic story for Nigeria.
It is.
You know?
I mean, the business prospects in Nigeria are phenomenal. Yeah. It's a big economy. There's a big consumer market there. But again, you know, some of the concerns I have and things I'm worried about are how this is going to affect business going forward. Is this going to affect that 10% projection? Are we looking at a scenario where it's going to drive away investment or freeze investment, or you know? So there's a lot of things that you know, this sort of a policy, implementing a policy which can cripple infrastructure. There are a lot of things that it causes concern.